Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anurag Jain, and I'm going to be the moderator of today's session. A bit about me. I'm a fashion enthusiast based in India and working in promotion of the indigenous crafts of Southeast Asia. Today's session is about finding the right threads to weave Africa's apparel economy, where we will be talking about the second-hand clothing industry of Ghana. We have an expert, Mr. Samuel Oteng, and in brief time, we will get to know about him and the amazing work he's doing. Few housekeeping rules for today's session. Everyone will be on mute except the host, of course. In case anyone has any questions, which we hope you will have as the session convenes, feel free to drop them on the chat box and I will make sure to cover them in between or at the end of the session. So yeah, I guess we have enough participants, we can proceed. So in Kantamento, 30,000 people work 6 days a week to sell, repair, clean, and upcycle the global north's clothing waste. This should be applauded, but it should not be romanticized. These 30,000 people take on a level of risk that is unjust. Many of the Cantamento's retailers take out loans with 35% interest rates to purchase the bales of clothing that have been shipped from all over the world. Clothing that has in most cases been donated for free by consumers or collected by brands as dead stock write-offs. With only 20% of Cantamento's retailers making a profit, many refer to their business as a gambling job. On top of the steep financial risk associated with this business, the labor is physically backbreaking and spiritually dehumanizing. And then we have waste. Despite the best efforts of Cantamento's entrepreneurs, 40% of the clothing leaves the market as waste. Accra lacks the landfill space for this clothing waste, so much of it is burnt in the open air, swept into the gutter from where it eventually makes its way to the sea, or dumped in informal settlements where Accra's most vulnerable citizens live. So, Mr. Samuel Oteng, can you please start with introducing yourself and what do you do?
Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
My name is Samuel. I'm from Ghana. I am a fashion designer and also a fashion researcher. I have always been interested in and had sustainability and then like good fashion work ethics, like to the core of me right from the beginning of fashion. I am currently working actively with the OR Foundation, which is a research organization which works towards social justice within the fashion space, fashion waste that is. I have worked with the OR Foundation almost a year now, and even before working the OR Foundation, I worked on a few projects around Kantamento and then the secondhand clothing market in Ghana.
Yeah. Okay, that's perfect. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank
And
you too for having me.
so my first question to you is like, can you tell us about the second-hand clothing market of Ghana? Or let's say you have to describe it to me or people from the audience who haven't had the first-hand experience of Cantamento's second-hand clothing market.
Okay, so
What's it called?
okay,
Yeah.
so the Kantamento clothing market is secondhand clothing market is the biggest secondhand clothing market in Africa. I mean, there's no research to show if there's any other in the world that marks up to Kantamento. So it's very easy for me to say that it could be the biggest secondhand market in the world. Kantamento began like right around the independence, but didn't take until the 60s before it boomed to what it has become today. Kantamento is very huge and has the importer side and the retailer side. The importer side is the part of the market where the bills come in from where they're imported from, and the retailer side is where the clothes are being sold. In Kantamento, there are different like areas and all types of secondhand clothing sold there. So from women's wear to menswear to shoes to underwear, any type of fashion article that you could think of is possible to be found in Kantamento. And most of these people that work in Kantamento have been working there all their lives. And the thing about Kantamento is not just the retail or the selling of clothes that goes on in Kantamento, but it's actually a whole ecosystem that is in Kantamento. So there are the retailers, there are tailors who work in mending the clothes, there are dressmakers, there are t-shirt printers, there are stylists, there are carriers, there are food vendors. So Kantamento in itself is like an entire fashion industry in itself, because everything is going there. And then I think that's one thing that makes Kantamento a very like great model for of sustainability and circular economy, because what Kantamento tries to do is like recirculate and then like add on to the longevity of secondhand clothing.
Mr. Solomon just came for a second and he left. We can just wait for him, but yeah, we can proceed.
Yeah.
So also you have a fashion brand also with the name Oteng. Can you tell
Yes.
us more about like what it is?
Okay, so a thing I like to believe is an eclectic brand, fashion brand. I started Otting in 2016 whilst I was still in fashion school. And the original idea behind Otting was, trying to be experimental as a creative or as a fashion designer. But up until now, Otting has grown to become a brand that has sustainability as its core, in the sense that Oteng tried to build and respect the relationship the environment and then the society has with clothing. And Oteng has also grown to develop its aesthetic to be much more inherent with streetwear and street style. And Oteng is also very much built on the culture and heritage of the Ashanti people. And then the Ashanti people is an ethnic group or a tribe in Ghana, one of the biggest tribes in Ghana, and then that's where I'm from. So most of the aesthetics and most of the inspirations that drives the creativity at Oteng is inspired by heritage and culture of the Ashanti people.
But it's interesting to be working in an ecosystem where the market has so much of second-hand clothing coming into it. So do you think like how do you take it as? Is this something as a threat for your enterprise or it's kind of an opportunity to collaborate? How do you take it?
Um, Yeah, for me, I think there's two sides to the coin. Is impossible for me to say, is bad or is good. Like it's bad and it's good. So one thing I would say as a creative, from the beginning, I was I think, if I should say, almost disheartened and felt like my career as a designer in fashion in Ghana is jeopardized because of the influx of secondhand clothing coming into the country. But I think in 2013, I made friends with this lady, Linda, who also is a fashion designer and a researcher in material relations with clothing relations with the environment and the society. And I think with interactions from her and with her, I came to understanding that even though there was an issue, there was so many ways that you could look at the issue and then making it a solution or making it work for your good and rather working against you. So from that moment, I really started reading and learning further into like sustainable practices in fashion. And my very first collection that I ever did was um, inspired and basically created entirely around Kantamento and inspired by secondhand denim. So it was a very deep collection for me because it wasn't just on the surface. It was more about how denim as a clothing item really consumes water in its production process, and then all the process that it goes through, like through the weaving process into the end use, the consumer phase, and then the afterlife. So all of these things were things that I sort of grasped from Kantamanto. And the other side is, I mean, if you're a designer and then you're having all of these clothes coming in, it really sets you off in a way. And what I mean by this is the idea or the whole connection with secondhand clothing or Kantamanto in Ghana is not something that started just like a few days ago, a few years ago. It has been going on for a very long time. And for me, I believe that if a particular thing, whether good or bad, is happening for a very long time, it becomes a tradition. And then when tradition goes on for a very long time, it becomes a culture. And culture is not something you just take away overnight. It was not something you are able to push out the window or just like close overnight. It doesn't happen that way. Culture comes and it stays, and it takes a longer while to remove a culture or replace a culture with something else. So for me, it was very daunting because if you have a space where people are getting into the idea of second clothing, it sort of sets that as a threat to your own creativity. But here's one thing that I know that to tap into the problem, as I said earlier, they're making it a problem for you. So I think even more than me, I can speak for most Ghanaian designers that they also tap into the second market to as input, and they have been most Ghanaian designers have been recycling their entire careers, and then they get their sourcing materials all from Kantamento. So I think for me, this is also a way the Ghanaian design community or the Ghanaian fashion community also try to add to the longevity, or also try to add to the ecosystem and the sustainable energy that revolves around Kantamento.
That's an amazing work you're doing there.
Thank
So
you.
I have a follow-up question. So is it something, how's the entrepreneurship scene in Ghana when it comes to secondhand clothing? Like, is it something that like more entities like you who are trying to work into this field, or it's still quite new? Like how the situation is there?
I think in Ghana, I think in Ghana, DIY culture has always been part of us, like outside of like, what the global north may project. I think it's been very part of us. And one thing about Ghanaians in general is that we have a very strong relationship with clothing and garments. That is, I mean, the typical Ghanaian would go to, if a typical Ghanaian would want to make a shirt or a pair of pants or a dress, they would go to like, the textile weaver or the printer or whoever sells or makes the fabrics or the textiles, purchase their textiles or have their textile design customized or purposely for them. They take it to the tailor or the dressmaker. They discuss the design or the cut or the style of the dress with them. And then they have the dress made to their size. So this is the case where the user or the person going to wear the dress has been part of the process right from the beginning to the end process where he is using it. So there's always this relation with clothes when it comes to Ghanaians. And then Ghanaians have this thing where like they pass clothes on. So I don't know if this is a culture most of you are familiar with, but then Ghanaians have a thing where like if an older sibling has a clothing item, it's made so well that it's able to be passed on to the younger sibling and to the younger sibling until it can't even be worn again. So that is how deep and how sentimental Ghanaians feel about clothing. It's not just a commodity, and it's not just like, like a piece of disposable that you just use and throw away. And I think I'm veering a bit far from your question, but what I'm trying to get at is because of this relation, I think there's a lot of people who have really honed into the second market. And as I said earlier, Kantamento has all of these people, and then most of these people are not just retailers. They are people who are pressers. Their main job is to press all the garments coming in. There are people who are trading, so their main job is to make sure that the fits and then all garments that have loose threads or broken seams or open seams are all closed up and then fixed nicely. There are people who are also printers. So, for example, if there's something from Kantamento, a T-shirt, for example, from Kantamento that is in bad condition or doesn't have interesting print. There are people who are there to reprint the T-shirt to give it new life. There are people who are also there reworking leather to make new bags and shoes. So, I mean, I think there are people who are really, and the thing is, these are not people, contrary to how we have come to believe that sustainability or sustainable practices is a trend now. Continental people have been living the sustainable life, and then Ghanaians in general have been living the sustainable life. So usually when I hear like the global north trying to preach the idea of sustainability onto like Africans and Ghanaians, it's just funny. Like I laugh at it because it's not something that we are trying to learn. It's a life that we've been living, and for me, I think that is what sustainability should be: a way of life, not just a trend or a practice that you're doing overnight or to just get some clout on Instagram. Yeah. So I think for Ghana, like this really goes on, and then it makes it very very inherent that these people do this. Aside this, even now there are people or there are younger people who are taking Kantamento to Instagram. So there are people who work closely with retailers in Kantamento. They get the stuff, they take it home, like style it up and take pictures on it, put it on Instagram and make their sales up there too. So the idea of recirculating or making the circular economy like go ahead is really inherent here in Ghana.
That's amazing. Like that's an entire economy in itself.
Yeah.
Just the concept in global north. So yeah, and also like you said, like you're working with denim primarily, but
Yeah.
then is like, do you think like there are certain materials that's kind of creating a negative implications on the ecosystem? Like if you talk about cotton, polyester, silk,
I
like
think
what's your take?
generally I wouldn't leave any of these things out, because here is the case where all of these garments coming in, I mean the garments come in bills, and then the bills come, and a higher portion of these clothes are not saleable. And
Yeah,
then like the case of this is because I mean clothes that are being made now are not of the best quality. So people buy them and then wait a few days, and then it's already, the seams are already ripping apart, and it's not strong enough. The color is washing out because it's made poorly. And so all of these clothes that are packed into bales and shipped into Ghana, only a very small percentage of them is being sold and then given a second life. All of the others end up, on the floors of the market, in gutters close by, in gutters close by, and then all of these wash into the seas and the beaches around Accra and in the city. So it's not just the idea of a particular type of material or fabric that really has the ecosystem, but the entire waste clothing, the entire manufacturing, the entire deal of over consumerism is what is like polluting everything, because nothing is left out. So far as there is waste, is going to mess up everything. And here's a case where Ghana does not necessarily have a sanitary landfill. The only sanitary landfill here is expired out of its time. It took a shorter while than it was supposed to last, because there was so much influx and clothing and waste coming from Kantamento that it shortened the life by 25 years, I think. And in that case, all of these clothes end up being burnt in the open air. Most of these end up in the gutters. And one thing about these places where the waste clothes get dumped is that there are neighborhoods around them, usually poor neighborhoods around them. And this is also used as a political tool to disenfranchise these people, because usually if there's waste around a particular place or a village or a community, it is blamed on the community or the town or the people around these places, that they are the ones who are creating the waste. But then that is not it at all. It's just the influx of waste coming in from the global north that is just unbearable. And then, like saying this, most people would think that if all of this is happening, why is it that there isn't a ban, or why is it that there's still more clothing coming in? Here's the thing: Kantamento is not a problem. Kantamento is only dealing with the problem and highlighting the problem. The real issue is over consuming and overproduction that is coming in from the global north. So here is the case where like Ghana gets to suffer, or we get to suffer, like all the bad traits having to deal with the problem. So
no,
the
definitely.
negative
Yeah.
the negative impact on the ecosystem goes broad and broad. It's not just, an issue of a particular material, but everything coming in.
No, definitely. Okay, we have a question from the audience from Tanushree. So, like, do you think the secondhand clothing industry is increasing the commodification of clothing or contributing to its value?
Sorry, just I had a break in the audio. I could try to find a question
Uh,
as well. Yeah.
so, do you think the secondhand clothing industry is increasing the commodification of clothing or contributing to its value?
I don't think the secondhand clothing industry is necessarily contributing to the value of clothing, if that's what the question is. And this is what I mentioned before. The idea of second clothing, as before, just before I get to the question, last year I worked on a project called the circular economy, and this was to juxtapose the amount of clothing that Kantamento as a community is able to circulate within a time period, compared to all of these resale platforms all over the global north that get like all the funding and all the credit for very very little work, like compared to what Kantamento is doing. So for me, it really doesn't add value to clothing at all, and this is because as I said, generally, the reason why we are having all of these issues with clothing is because we do not have relationship with clothing. We do not have a valued relationship with clothing. If I should go to, one of these fast fashion brands, Zara, for example, and buy this t-shirt or t-shirt for $5, how on earth would you want to pay $5 for a t-shirt? And here's the case: the issue of waste is not it's not a material issue. It's an issue of exploitation and a social injustice. So it does not necessarily start from where the clothes are being made, or the clothes are being worn, or who is buying the clothes, but right from the space where the textiles are being made, the materials are being sourced, all these places where the garments are being made with cheap labor, and then even garment workers are not being paid for it. So all of these things happen, and then like it all comes down the line into where it ends up in Kantamento. So definitely the secondhand clothing like industry does not necessarily like increase contribute to the value of clothing at all. If anything, it decreases it. The only thing is that we in this world are trying to be sustainable and try to build a circular economy. But the idea of adding value to clothing, it doesn't, because it's just over consumerism and then over consuming. And if you don't have a relationship with clothing, you are not going to give value to it. That is why you would want to go to a shop and pay, $20 for a three-piece suit and be happy with it. How would you buy a three-piece suit for $30, $20 and be happy with it? Did you think about the materials used in making the garments? Did you think about who was making the garment? Did you think about how much they were paid for making the garments? Did you think about how long so all of these things, it definitely does not add value to the garment industry, because the more and more we disassociate and break the relationship we have with clothing, the more the value of the clothing is dropped. And talking about how secondhand clothing increases the commodification of clothing, it does increase commodification, because the thing is, if people see like for example, in Ghana, there's a growing generation, there's a growing there's a growing demographic. And one of my fears as a designer and as someone from Ghana is that if we are going to have this influx of clothing coming into the market every day or every week, this is the case where we have 50 million pieces of clothing coming in by the week. 50 million. And this is a country of only 30 million people. So imagine every day, every week, 50 million. That is a lot. So if there is going to be that amount of clothing coming in, my fear is that it's going to shift the minds of the growing demographic, because I feel this is what has happened in the global north. The global north, you see clothes being bombarded to you in your emails, on your phone, everywhere. So there's no value. No, people don't even think through the clothing if they really have to buy the clothing, or they really need the clothing, or they're actually going to wear the clothing. All they know is it's cheap and then they can afford it, so they buy it. So my fear with the idea of second, like increasing commodification of clothing, yes, it would, but then it is a problem.
Of course. Yep. You're right. So I'm also thinking in terms of how we have seen with Rwanda and other African countries where they tried to ban the secondhand clothes import.
Yeah.
And that thing didn't work out, and they have to kind of step back
Yeah.
with the whole issues happening with United States particularly.
Yeah.
But what do you think, is that the solution if, let's say, that the government of Ghana overnight decides to ban the import of clothes? Do you think that's a way to work it out?
Okay, so I personally don't believe in the idea of banning second clothing, and the reason why this may sound contrary to what I was saying, but the reason why I say this is that first of all, as I said, the idea of second clothing is in Ghana, or Kantamento in Ghana, is something that is built not just like through material. It's something that has been going on, became a tradition, and now it is a culture. And then taking it far back, this is the one thing that was built around professional dressing. And for me, this like has its way to do with colonialism, because here's a case where the colonizer or the white folks came in, they tell you, okay, this is their way of dressing, because it wasn't like Africans or us as Ghanaians were naked when before the white folks like their foot on Ireland. We weren't. We had our own clothes. We had our own and our own garment system. We had our own textile system. So it wasn't like we didn't have the idea of clothing. We did have an idea of clothing. But here's the issue where, you know, because they're colonizers. And then for me, one thing I always say is for someone to colonize another, or for one to be, you know, a colonizer and want to be the colonized, they have to strip them of everything they know. So here's the idea. The white man came and tells you, okay, this is the way you're dressing, but this is not the way you should dress. You should dress up in a suit, or you should dress up in a shirt and a pants, or you should dress up a certain type of way because that's what we think is the best. And through this issue of trying to assimilate and trying to get yourself accepted, because this is the case, you can enter into certain spaces if you're not dressed in a professional way. You can set into schools or events, or be part of, you know, a certain social or status cohort because you're not dressed in a certain way. And if you are someone who is not privileged enough to afford this clothes at the time, all you have to result in is into hand-me-downs and second clothing and donations. So then this idea builds. For example, let me ask you this: if you, Anurag, were a father and you have, you know, 4 kids, and then you are, you know, a professional worker, but then you are asked to dress a certain type of way because it is believed that that is the right way to dress, because that's what the colonizer is saying. You as a father will dress this way, and then by the time your kids grow up, even if you don't teach them, they will see you doing the same thing and they'll pick it up.
Of course.
And what
Yeah.
happens is if your kids decide to have kids as well, they'll pass it on. And this is why I say it becomes a tradition. And then after a while, this is something I was talking independence. So 1950, before 1957 until now. So it's not something that it's very easy to go away. And as I said, it's not something that is just on the surface. There's so many threads and strings that is connected to it that you just can't, you know, wake up and then ban it, because it has a different dynamics applied to all of it. And here's the other thing. As I said, the issue of Kantamento is that it's not necessarily the problem. It's highlighting the problem. So if there's going to be any issue, it should be solved at the source. And that is the source is overproduction and over consuming, that all is coming from the global north.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So let's say, I'll just twist the question a bit for you. So let's say that with the whole anti-fast fashion campaigns that's running all over the world, let's say in 5 years, 10 years, or in some time, it might actually have an impact, and the people in global north will stop overconsumption. And then eventually we can see that the secondhand clothes are not getting imported to Ghana because there are no secondhand clothes anymore.
Yeah.
So then what do you think, what the picture will look like in Ghana? Like, will they like go back?
Okay, so I think if that should happen, it was going to cause a resurgence into like the textile industry and then the clothing industry in Ghana itself. Because here's the case where the whole idea of a second market is trying to recirculate and build a circular economy. So if there's no influx of clothing coming from anywhere, the clothing in Ghana is what is going to be recirculated. So here's the case where we build a circular economy within our own economy. Yeah, and then honestly, I'm hoping that happens. It gets to a point where none of us have to fight about, you know, fast fashion anymore. That would be a dream come true. And then I will actually be happy to see that in my lifetime.
Yes, you all do. And then kind of a same question, but in a very dystopian level. So we are seeing those fast fashion factories getting built up in Ethiopia and even Madagascar. It's kind of getting into the Western African continent. So do you think that's something, if it starts ending up being in Ghana, do you think that will change the ecosystem? Or we'll see a difference?
If there are fast fashion factories in Ghana.
End up, making the units in Ghana.
Okay, so here's the thing. That's one thing that I was saying, that it looks like the whole idea, because here's the thing. In 2013, I mean, before, I think the first time I visited Kantamento personally was in 2011, if I'm not mistaken, or 2011 or 2010. That was the first time I visited Kantamento. And as at the time, like I could, from that time until now, I could really tell the difference between the type of clothing that were there and the amount of clothing that was there and the amount of clothing that comes into Kantamento now. And here's the case: before then, most of the clothing that used to Kantamento were of high quality, and there weren't so much clothing coming in at the time. But here's the case where there's so much clothing coming in, and as I said, if there's so much clothing coming in, it has the way of shifting the minds of the growing demographic or younger people into the relationship they have with clothing. Because if there's a big place like Kantamento where you go and see so many clothing and they're so cheap and they're coming in every day, you kind of almost have this shifted idea that, oh no, clothing is disposable and is right there and I can always just go and grab some, use it and throw away. And if this happens, like I feel like is a way that the global north with its influx is really um, incentivizing, the African people or the Ghanaian community into thinking in the way of fast fashion or continuous consuming. And having these things happen really shifts because, for example, these clothes that have been sold to Kantamento, most of them are resulted from fast fashion. Fast fashion is cheap. So if young people are going to think that this is what's happening and they're going to have same clothes coming in but this time in shops and then all polished up, I think it's going to just have a shift, and this is going to disrupt the entire, it will even be worse than what we are seeing now, because here's the case that there's going to be like a decline in the growth of the textile and clothing industry in the country. There's going to be the most important thing, the cultural aspect that really surrounds the idea of clothing and textiles in Ghana. And that's one of the things that is very important, because I feel the moment that we lose that relationship or that culture that we have with clothing as Ghanaians or as Africans, that is the end of it for us. Because right now, the only difference is that I feel the global north lacks that relationship with clothing, and then African as a people, we have it. So the moment that we lose that, we are done.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
definitely having fast fashion factories or even fast fashion malls or shops in anywhere is definitely a nosedive.
Wow. No, definitely. Yeah. And then we have another one question from the participants. So what is the government of Ghana's view on the entire second-hand clothing industry? Are they like supportive of it or any interventions done so far?
Okay, so the way that Kantamento or the Ghanaian government system is built, there is the central government, and then there is the local government that sort of deals with Kantamento, and the dynamics with politics and the distribution of funds, usually not much money is coming in to cater for the affairs and then the running and then the putting development of Kantamento. Here's the case where Kantamento started is not as it is before. Kantamento started like several decades ago, and it has grown to become the space that it is today. And if like this growth has happened and then there isn't a shift in and the distribution of funds, is it causes it to be very dwindled when it comes to development. And here's the case where the government does not necessarily, I mean, there have been a few cases where the government intervenes with development and then maintenance and infrastructural development in the market, but it always has like political implications in the case that there is going to be like power dynamic play into who's using the space. Just recently, in on December 15th, there was a fire in Kantamento that burnt like a big portion of the market. And this is the case where up to 300 plus people, retailers, lost their stores, got burned down, bills that they had purchased got burnt. And the government intervention at the time was to help. But then the idea is, if they were to build new market stalls for these market women, they would have to pay like extra money for these market
Oh
spaces.
God.
And then if it happens, it's going to be a power play, because then there's only going to be rich people affording the the new spaces, and then this will cause a shift because the real people who are in the market and doing their business will not be able to afford it, and then it will be in total different hands. So talking about how the government views the secondhand industry in Ghana, definitely is running. So I definitely is getting its cuts and taxes, from the industry. So of course, if something has these implications, of course it will be interested in, but there isn't really any direct help or direct impact coming from the government vis-a-vis low funding coming in from the central government. And then the political play, we always know how politics works. There isn't really the people who are on the ground who really need the help are not getting it. But then there's always this power dynamics and then play with funding.
Oh my God, that definitely. Then like it's making me wonder, like what about like certain uh, like facilities that should be there for workers of any sort, be it like fair wages, job security, hygienic work conditions. Like, is that
There,
something
there
that's
is nothing. There is nothing like that. As I said, just the fire that happened in on the 15th of December. Up until now, the market women, through their own tenacity and resilience, are rebuilding the market themselves. So this is the case where most of these market women take loans from banks to keep their business going, and they run into debt sometimes because most of these bills they purchase between $75 to $500 per bill. So they take the loans, and sometimes the interests are up to 35% by the month. So that's a lot of money and a lot of of difference that you have to pay back to the bank. So if you should buy a bill and then you come in and half the bill is not closed that are sellable, you end up having very small amounts. And then most of these market women went into debt when the fire happened. But then they ended up building, they are still building the fires themselves. They are still building the market themselves. So there isn't really any safety net. There's no protection. And as I said, these people in Kantamento, we are all talking about, revamping and sustainability and recycling. But these people in the market are the true superheroes when it comes to, circulating and then making
concrete?
sure. But then there's no safety net. There's no justice. There's no healthcare, and even the market as a space is not conducive enough. That's why these fires keep happening. Because if the market is an open space, there are open warriors. There isn't proper sewage system. So all of these things are not just happening, and then that's one of the reasons why this fire might have happened in December.
That's true. And then like what's the role of, so then there might be like humanitarian organization like All Foundation. So do you think they are like making a big impact, or like what's the situation when it comes to secondhand clothing market? Like how much impact is it able to make?
In terms of the Aura Foundation.
All foundation or organizations such as All Foundation, if they are
Okay,
more
so
like
Kantamento is a very big space, and sometimes I think one thing that I've gotten to know, like working closely with these retailers and then interviewing them, is that they strongly believe that they've really built the market themselves. It belongs to them, and then they've been keeping it running all of these years. So usually, even in times of crisis, they don't necessarily seek out for help because they know that the help has not been coming. So they don't necessarily see the reason why they should be going out and looking for help at this particular point. But um, organizations like the OR Foundation do its best into trying to work on reparations and trying to make sure that these market we understand their problems, trying to tell their own narratives and then trying to help them every way that we can. So yeah, there are certain bodies who try to help, and then for example the Our Foundation, we try to help every way that we can through funding and then relief projects.
okay.
Yeah.
And then since it's focused on the secondhand clothing, it's kind of the entire dynamics is quite different. Do you think that it's kind of uh, new business models are coming up in this scenario? Like someone in the participant asked, like, are there like rental or resale models that's coming up in the market, or that's something where what you are observing?
Can you take the question again? I didn't really get you.
So I'm saying like, do you think that there are more innovative business models coming out in the secondhand clothing market in terms of rental or resale?
Okay, so here's the thing. Kantamento necessarily does not. One thing that sets Kantamento or apart or makes Kantamento what it is the idea of mutual aid and mutual interest. So as I said, all of these things happen in Kantamento. They are all happening at once. People buying, people selling, people remaking, people altering, people styling, people reprinting. All of these things are happening all at once. It's not. It doesn't happen in isolation. And there isn't really like technology or anything happening in Kantamento. So what it has been is always what it has been. There isn't a lot of like innovation going on. But what for us at OR Foundation trying to do is trying to build a space where we have a shredder and like the garment waste or the clothes that have not been sold or the clothes on the garment floor can be collected, shredded, and then made into tools or materials that can be used into making fresh textiles and products. Yeah. So there isn't a lot of innovations happening in Kantamanto. I think the only thing that has really caused a shift lately is the introduction of younger people trying to get into the idea of reselling and then the resale economy, because there are so many of them building Instagram accounts where they resell like certain type of secondhand clothes. So, but aside that, there isn't really a lot of like innovation in terms of technology or like anything of that matter. There isn't. There really isn't much.
We are coming closer. We are coming close to the end of the session. So if any participants have any questions, please feel free to drop it on the chat box. So we have one question from Victor, which he's asking like, do you have any thoughts on the effects of secondhand clothing on backward linkages in the economy? Like for example, cotton growing.
As I said, the idea of secondhand, this is from Victor. Hi
Yeah.
Victor. The idea of secondhand clothing is not, as I said, is not an issue of waste and is not an issue of particular problem. It's one issue that goes right on from the beginning. So it definitely has its negative effect or like negative effects from on cotton growing as well. Because I mean, cotton growing is right where it begins. So just this thought, Victor. Imagine if there's a fast fashion brand that is like overproducing and then making this clothes for cheap. Definitely, they're going to purchase the cotton for cheap as well. And if the cotton are being purchased for cheap, that means the farmers or whoever is working on this cotton farm are being paid very, very little wages for their work. And if this is happening, it means that there's also a lot of, chemicals being put on this cotton plantation because it has to be produced and they want it in higher quantities. So here's the case: the farmer is being affected, the environment is being affected. Wherever it is purchased and is going to be produced, they are also going to be affected because whatever fast fashion brand is going to look for this fabrics is going to look for it for cheap. So it really has a way of affecting everything. And as I said, like I think anybody listening here should just start thinking of secondhand from this moment going, not just as a waste problem, but an issue of social injustice and continuous exploitation of people.
That's actually that's a very nice way to put it. And then we have another question from George, like how can we successfully integrate local textile industries and still keep secondhand clothing ecosystems? Like, yeah, that's like a very interesting question of we have this
Okay,
indigenous knowledge of making clothes and then we have secondhand clothing.
okay. So for example, I as a designer, right from the beginning when I realized what Kantamento was, and then how I could tap into it as a place of sourcing for my designs, I also try to have a way to put them together. um, I really didn't think this was going to pop up, but then I should have made available some visuals that I could share with you. So there are so many Ghanaians, as I said, some Ghanaian designers, as I said, that are really working into the idea of textiles. So there is when I worked on my graduate collection in my fashion school, when I was leaving fashion school. I worked on a collection that revolved around streetwear and then the funeral culture of Ashantis. And here's the case where I had to introduce some traditional like weaving techniques with denim. And here's the case where the denim that I was using was coming from Kantamento, and then the weaving techniques was something that was very indigenous to the people of Ashanti. So here's a way that I found a way to putting two worlds that I'm interested in together. So there are so many innovative ways that we could end up putting, overlapping or putting these two worlds together. Of course, there will always be that case where there will be one overpowering the other. And I think for me, what is the most important is that we preserve the relationship that we have with clothing. I don't know where George is from, but I have a strong belief that like all through Africa, and then I don't know if it's so in India. Maybe Tanushree, maybe Tanushree will know, will know this. I don't know if it's the same in India, but then there is just this close relation that we as a people have with clothing. And so the moment we hone on that idea of having that close and personal relationship with clothing, I think it is going to be a way forward. And then there's not going to be an overpower of the second clothing over than the textile economy. Although that seems to be the problem, and that seems to be the direction where we are heading to, because fast fashion doesn't seem to be stopping. It just keeps going, sadly.
Like, so George has like thrown a question at so Matish and Tanushree, who are the fashion experts from India. So if you can like, so Matish, if you can unmute and you can like talk about if you can think African countries can ever get to where India is now. So Matish, can you?
Hi, very happy to jump in. Thanks, Samuel. I don't think it's a question of India being ahead of the curve, or I don't think it's like, can Africa get to where India is? I actually just put my comment here. There is a very similar situation in India with a lot of secondhand clothing being imported. But the response to that was a very thriving textile recycling industry. And I'm wondering if something like that exists in Ghana, and I believe OR is working on something like that already. Would love to hear about that.
So thank you, Tanu. So there is it okay if I call you Tanu? Sorry.
Of course, everyone.
Okay. Okay, Tanu. So thanks. So there isn't really a textile like recycling industry, if I should say, in I mean, there are designers who are working along these ways, but there isn't really like a built space or centers where you actually go and have your clothing recycled or have like textiles recycled to made into new products. But as I said, the OR Foundation is currently working on funding and working on a space where we could have like these second clothing that cannot be sold, shredded and made into threads and fabrics for designers to use. And far from that, there are also a lot of designers, as I said before, who really hone into this secondhand markets, into getting stuff and reproducing. I know there are most people that use these secondhand materials in creating other like furnitures and stuff like that. So there isn't a few artisans who work along the line, but generally there isn't any build centers or like in a larger scale where this is being done. But then hopefully we'll get there. I mean, that we are working on that at the OR Foundation, and then I think there are a few people out there who are also working along those lines, and I can't wait for those things to happen.
Awesome. And thank you so much for your answers.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I guess we are at the end of the session now, but thank you so much, Mr. Samuel, for coming, taking out time.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'm so glad I was able to come. I don't know if how this works, but then my email is always open if
you can type it on the chat box so that everyone can
I'm going to
do it.
yeah. Okay.
I just saw Matish unmuted himself. Perhaps he had something to say, just because someone had called on him earlier. So Matish, if you can hear us. Oh,
yeah.
thank you.
Hi, George. Yeah. Sorry. I was just trying to figure out how to unmute myself. Thank you so much, Samuel. It was great to hear you. And I think, it'll be, I think we're running out of time, but it'll be really, really interesting to kind of get in touch after
Yes.
this to understand a bit more about, what are the trends that are similar, the trends that are slightly different
Mhm.
in the context of South Asia as a region and East Africa.
Mhm.
But I think I think the Tanu perfectly summed it up, saying that we are really kind of trying to understand those nuances. But I was really hearing what you had to say in terms of how it's been always a part of culture, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that is pretty much the situation in India. It's now actually looking really kind of into this culture of using and reusing our clothes multiple times. And that's something that we need to remember, as a country, and value that, because it's not something that we need to necessarily be learning for the first time. And I think the uh, in terms of India, the kind of innovations that we are seeing, people are working on different types of models. On one hand, to really extend the lives of clothing. At the same time, the other part of the challenge, where perhaps we could connect later and talk about, is that in India there's a huge dependence on the informal workers, waste collectors, and because probably the industry depends on waste collectors for collecting about 90% of its waste. That's how important a role that they can play. How they can also be integrated along with the fact that you're extending the lives of the clothes. Can you really kind of formalize this labor force into kind of contributing to that process and becoming more a part of that organized market? I think that's also a theme that we are very closely kind of working on. But absolutely, fantastic to hear your side of the story, your experience. Very, very inspiring, and we would love to connect.
Very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I just left my email address so we can continue the conversation, Samatish.
Absolutely, look forward.
Awesome. And thank you so much, Mr. Samuel, for coming. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking part in this event. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anurag. Thank you, Samuel. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.